Hey guys, it's been a hot second since I made a video, and that's because I took a little break from Dark Souls 3. But now I'm back, and with a build that's so poorly optimized that only the divine intervention of God keeps me from deleting this really bad build. But really, it's so much fun, and there's so many aspects of it that I really enjoy, and I'm going to talk about those. So, bear with me as I take a deeper than usual dive into why this character is the way that they are. So back when I was making videos on Elden Ring and Elden Ring speculation in general, a whole bunch of comments were about how I should just go read Berserk. So I did. I don't know if I'd recommend it just because, for every part that's incredibly compelling, there are like 3 or 4 other parts that are insanely disturbing. But it was really interesting to see how much Berserk really influenced Dark Souls and Fromsoft's work, especially in the character designs. So there's this one character that really stuck with me called Mozgus, and he was this chief inquisitor of Berserk's equivalent to the Way of White. Basically, he would go around, torturing and killing heretics, quote unquote. And he was actually responsible for killing all the people that turned into these, rolling corpses that later became the inspiration for the Bone Wheels in the Dark Souls series. I'm also fairly convinced that he's the character design inspiration for the Evangelists in Dark Souls 3. They have similar size and clothes, and he even at one point smashes someone's head with a Bible, which is an attack that the Evangelists have. Mozgus also has a really strange looking face, and the reason for that is revealed to be due to Mozgus falls on his face 1,000 times every day in reverence to God, which I just find so hilarious that just makes his face flat. So then I made this character that was so heavily inspired by Mozgus, I had no other choice but to do this to the poor man's face. So this is Inquisitor Royce. It is a 50+6 build that gets its damage from dexterity and faith, which means it gets very little damage. But that's okay because I get to use the things that I find fun. Since I'm on PC, I used the mod Honest Merchant to make this particular build, and that was because I wanted to leave myself open up to invasions. See, originally this character was supposed to be this Inquisitor of hosts, and he would come around and torture them with a build that isn't very good but just hits you a lot and annoys the shit out of you. But then it kind of morphed into this Inquisitor of not very good invaders, because if you're a good invader, you should be able to kick my ass with this mediocre build. But otherwise, I just abuse the absolute shit out of people who spam parry. In case you were unaware of this, the Rose of Ariandel can't be parried. But since it has a club moveset, people kind of assume it can be parried. So combine the Bleed auxiliary from the Rose of Ariandel plus the Bleed auxiliary from Painting Guardian Curve Sword, and then I can also cast Gnaw with the Rose. And that's what's pretty fun about this build, is it's not a dedicated bleed build. It has the potential to bleed people out, but I'm not depending on the bleed out in order to win invasions, which is something that I really hate about bleed builds. So if an opponent, rolls my bleed, no problem. I'm still doing damage. I'm not doing good damage, but it's not terrible damage either. Essentially, this build punishes players for the great sin of gimmicks. If your whole gimmick is that you're just going to try to parry everything, this build punishes that. If I was that kind of person, I could just put one of those counters up in the corner of the screen and just count how many times this guy attempted to parry my whip, or how many times this guy just completely whiffed on a parry. But that seems to be this invader's entire gimmick, is they want to parry, and maybe they're wearing the Hornet Ring. I don't really know, because they never landed a parry, but that seemed to be their entire game plan. This build also punishes players whose entire gimmick is they're gonna use the mace and buff it and then pop Perseverance and try to get you to trade with them. But I'm gonna punish that because I can just outspace them with the Rose. And the Rose is nice because people don't really respect its range. There's other invaders whose entire gimmick at this level is to just kind of poise up and use something like a buffed Drakeblood Greatsword, which while short has a shitload of split damage, which at mid-level and lower levels really hits hard. But again, they don't really have any other game plan outside of relying on players with shittier gear trading with them. In this instance, I definitely do have shittier gear, except I'm just not gonna get in there and trade with them. So I'll keep my distance. I still want to play aggressive, but I'm just going to outspace them with the rose and punish their rolls with the one-handed curve sword. Oh, also something that's a nice touch to this build is that the fashion is all white, and every time you get hit or you hit someone else, there's like a blood spray. So by the end of the fights, like my cape is just like covered in blood. It's one of those small details that doesn't really matter, but it's just like it adds to the persona of this character. Another nice thing about the rose is that it has really good priority out of hit stun. I don't know the exact like poise values or frames, but I do know that if you get into mutual hit stun with a curved sword or a straight sword or something small like that, and you're using the rose, you will have priority out of that mutual hit stun, which wins me this fight right here. So outside of the mediocre damage, this build also has some flaws, like the Painting Guardian curved sword. It's like really short, and its full weapon art, does a lot of bleed, but is really anime. So you get stuck in a long animation, and people can punish that pretty easily. So to try to keep myself like much faster and lighter on my feet with both weapons, I often switch to the Lightning Mailbreaker, which for no discernible reason is really good at this level. And it's fun to play with a dagger that's actually good that isn't the Murky. Actually, the Mailbreaker is kind of like if the Murky was fun instead of really sweaty. It has the default dagger R1s, which are pretty good, but then also a really fun weapon art that has a quick startup and an R2 that isn't totally useless, which is unique for daggers in general. Oh, and the Lightning Mailbreaker's critical damage at this level is kind of insane. Like if you wanted to wear the Hornet Ring, you could just one-shot everyone at this level. But I don't, because a quick and easy kill would not be in line with this character. Because again, it's a lore build. So yeah, this build is pretty fun. It does really well against solo hosts and individual invaders, but it really struggles against multiple people. It doesn't have very wide swings, so it often becomes very hard to hit multiple people. There's also instances and certain weapons where I just need some hyper armor. So for that, we have the Lightning Flamberge. The Flamberge is one of my favorite weapons because you can kind of go to any mid-level build and pick up the Flamberge and have it perform phenomenally well. It's been talked about at length, but just to name a couple of the highlights, it has low stat requirements, its weapon art R2 does way more damage than it should, and it just kind of infuses well with any build you want to put it on, and especially at mid-level. But it's kind of necessary in situations like these. I can't really afford to output so little damage with my other setup when dealing with two people. People kind of mistake, the ability to do damage as like the ability to put phantoms away, but if you just go back before that, right? How do you put those phantoms away? You create space, and the way you create space is with damage, by damaging one of the phantoms, getting them to back off and heal, and having a few moments alone with the host or other members of the party. So that's what damage does for you, and if your build just doesn't do that much damage, it's just going to make it so much harder for you to create space during an invasion. And yeah, it's smart to rely on the level, to do some of your damage for you, but you yourself have to be able to, pull your own. And that's just not something that the Whip and Curved Sword playstyle is going to be able to do against two people. Especially when one of those phantoms is just going to spam the running attack on a katana and the Frayed Blade weapon art over and over again. So the phantom gets immolated by the Fire Witches, which you just love to see. The host, naturally, is going to run all the way back to the bonfire. And again, you have to be able to do enough damage to prevent them from resummoning. Either to just keep them off wherever that summon sign is on the ground, or to just kill them immediately. And the Flamberge does that very well. So yeah, that's how a lot of these invasions go. If it's a solo host, I just whip him and slash him. And if it's two people, I just make one easy swap to the Flamberge, take out the Phantom, and then swap back to the whipping and the slashing and the bleeding. I'm highlighting this particular invasion because right after this poor host got destroyed by the Pontiff Knight, they ended up invading me, which I totally love. And I was worried for a second because I was like, maybe they invaded me because I had taken their last ember that they needed to play co-op, and they were invading hoping to get more embers. So I dropped them a few just to make sure that their co-op journey can continue. And I know that's probably unlikely that that particular scenario was exactly the case as to why they were invading, but I just like the aspect of co-opers then participating in PvP. You get so many complaints online about like, oh, you're interrupting my co-op. But I really appreciate people who accept it as one holistic online experience. You know, you don't have PvP without co-op, but you also don't have co-op without PvP. And I really appreciate the people who understand that. Well, that's about all I really had to say for this video. This was like the first build in a little bit that I've made that I've had a lot of fun with. I've made several others in the meantime and kept deleting them because I just found I was just gravitating towards the same weapons and the same playstyles. And I have other characters that already use those weapons and playstyles better, and it fits more with their character. So this was the first one that stuck in a little while. I also took a little break in between videos from playing Dark Souls 3, and that's healthy to do. No, it's healthy just to take a little break. This game is 5 years old and hasn't had new content in like 3.5 or 4 years. So I find a short little break always like makes me really excited to come back to it when I always inevitably do. I'm just gonna let this last clip play for the rest of the video because it's like one of my favorite things. It's a cosplay build versus a cosplay build, or a lore build, or whatever. You know, he's doing this like Roman Centurion build, which is not good, but done really, really well. You know, it's not going to win you a ton of invasions, but the man chose a theme and stuck to it, and I love that. So that's it for me. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.